Episode 1, The Purest Death. They buried her in white, but something kept breathing beneath the veil. They say Clara never sinned. Not once. She never lied, never touched, never let her thoughts drift where innocence might burn. At 17, she died while praying healing in front of a flickering candle. Hands clasped so tight her knuckles bled. Her lips were moving when her breath stopped. They found her with her eyes open, fixed not on the cross above the altar, but at something just above it. Something no one else could see. The town of Hollowbrook called it a holy death. She was buried in white lace, a wreath of lilies circling her brow like a makeshift halo. The priest, Father Muriel, of the funeral with trembling hands. He had baptized her, taught her catechism, heard her silent prayers through the veil of a confessional she barely used. Clara never had much to confess. That's what made it all so wrong. It was during the final rite, the moment when the soil hit the coffin, that the first thing went wrong. The candle wouldn't go out. The one from her bedside, same flame burning when she deed was supposed to be extinguished and buried with her. But it flickered beneath a closed lid, beneath 6 feet of earth, beneath silence. It flickered. 3 days later, the gravedigger found the soil cracked open. No sign of forced entry, no roots, no flood, just an opening as if something had risen, not fallen. They exhumed the coffin. It was still sealed, but Father Marin noticed something. The air around the wood was warm, not like rot or decay, like breath. They opened it. Clara's body was untouched. No scent, no discoloration. Still kneeling inside the coffin, hands now clenched tighter than before. And beneath the lace veil, her lips had moved. Just slightly, enough to form a shape. One word, burned into the silk like a blister. Aye. Father Marin said nothing. He closed the coffin, locked the church doors, and wrote a letter to the diocese, requesting silence, requesting help, requesting permission to rebury a girl who had not decayed and had not, by all signs, left. But that night, someone broke into the chapel. The next morning, the body was gone, and on the altar, written in soft, perfect handwriting, Clara's was a single sentence. I kept myself clean, so why won't he let me in? And from that day on, the candle at the altar never went out again, even when there was no flame. Episode 2, she wouldn't stay buried. The ground never held her, and every time they tried to bury her deeper, the veil came back wetter. They buried her again, this time without ceremony. No hymns, no candles, no lilies, just a closed box and a shovel. Father Marin refused to attend. He locked himself in the rectory, whispering psalms with trembling lips, repeating the same line over and over like a broken rosary. If she was pure, then why was the grave ashamed to hold her? The gravediggers dug deeper, 9 feet, then 10. They dropped the coffin in like it was diseased, like maybe the farther they sank her into the earth, the less likely she'd rise again. But they didn't notice what they buried with her. Clara's veil. It hadn't been in the coffin the first time. It had been found folded neatly on the altar, still warm, still wet with something that smelled like lilies and iron. No one questioned it. They simply placed it over her face again and walked away. The next morning, the veil was back, on the altar, wetter this time, dripping. No one spoke. No one dared open the grave again, until the dog disappeared. Father Marin's dog, Tibet, an old golden retriever, faithful and silent like his master, was found at the edge of the cemetery, facing Clara's plot. His paws were muddy, his throat ripped open from the inside. There was no blood around him, only one thing left on his fur, a thread of lace. That night, the townspeople gathered, quiet, shivering, pretending not to believe what they all knew. Clara had not stayed buried, and something was returning with her. Not vengeance, not decay, but confusion, a presence that didn't scream or curse or drag chains through the halls. It knelt in bedrooms, by cradles, at the edge of pews during late-night mass, always kneeling, always silent. But when people closed their eyes, they saw her, mouth moving, but no sound, eyes wide, but not begging, just asking, "What did I do wrong?" Father Marin began sleeping in the church. He moved the altar, burned the veil, but every morning it returned folded, wet, fragrant, and one night he found the baptismal font filled with water, though no one had touched it in months. Floating on the surface, a note, written in Clara's handwriting. Am I still clean? They say a soul that dies in sin can be cursed. But what happens to one that dies sinless and is still rejected? What happens to a soul so pure? Even heaven grows uneasy. Because Clara is not lost. She is waiting, and the grounded never wanted her. Episode 3. The priest who heard her pray after death. Her voice came from the confessional, but no one was inside. Just the scent of lilies and something colder than sin. Father Marin had heard confessions for 40 years. Adulterers, liars, thieves. She listened. Forgiven, absolved. He believed no sin was too dark for grace. Until Clara died, and her voice returned. It was the third night since her second burial. The church was locked. The lights dim. The only sound was the slow creak of the candle near the altar, one that never goes out. Father Marin couldn't sleep. He sat in the back pew, Bible in hand, though he hadn't turned a page in hours. And then, from the old wooden confessional came a breath. Not wind, not echo, just one slow inhale. That her voice. Forgive me, Father. He frowns. That voice is soft, unshaken, whispering from behind the velvet curtain. But he knew it. Clara. Impossible. He stood, heart racing, and approached the confessional like it was burning. Clara, he whispered, is that you? Silence. Then, I kept every vow. I stayed clean, but it won't speak to me. I need to confess something I don't understand. Marin opened the door to the booth. It was empty, but the air inside was humid, sweet. The scent of lilies mixed with something faintly metallic. On the seat lay a folded piece of paper. No name, no signature, just a list of sins. But they weren't Clara's. They were his. Every secret, every failure, every time he doubted, cursed, questioned God silently, all listed in her neat, perfect handwriting. And below them, one final line. I died without sin, Father, but I carry yours now. He collapsed, sobbing, not because she was haunting him, but because something had taken her purity and made it a vessel. Clara wasn't resting. She was collecting. From that night on, the confessional stayed cold. Even in summer, people said they heard breathing inside it when the church was empty. One man claimed to have seen her, a white veil behind the curtain, a whisper that said, tell me your sins, so I don't go alone. Father Marin hasn't spoken since. They found him 2 days later, curled in the booth, clutching his rosary with broken fingers. He had bitten off his own tongue, and inside his mouth, a single lace thread, still wet. Clara doesn't want revenge. She wants answers, but the only voices she hears now are the guilty. And she's listening from the dark, from behind the curtain, from beneath the veil. Episode 4. The angel that refused to claim her soul. He came cloaked in light, but would not touch her. Even angels fear what heaven abandoned. It happened on the 7th night. The church bells rang once. No one pulled the rope. No wind, no mass, just a single chime at exactly 3:33 a.m. They say that's the hour the veil between heaven and earth is thinnest. But that night it didn't just thin, it tore. The townspeople were all awakened by a sound that didn't belong to this world, like waves falling inside stone. And above the chapel, a light appeared. Not moonlight, not fire, something older, pure, and trembling. A man stood in the center of the church aisle, tall, barefoot, radiant, no name, no shadow. And yet, his face was full of grief. He walked slowly toward the altar, where Clara's veil had returned again, laid out like an offering. He looked at it and backed away. Father Marin, half mad, half praying, watched from the back. Are you an angel? He rasped. The figure turned, not answering, just blinking on, say slowly. Then he whispered, she was born untouched, but not unloved. What do you mean? She was not made for this world, nor the next. Marin knelt. If she was innocent, why won't heaven take her? The angel looked at him, and this time, his answer came like cracked thunder under breath. Because we fear what she is. He turned back to the veil, and as he reached to touch it, his hand burned. Not in fire. In scripture, verses bloomed on his skin like wounds. And the pure shall not pass, if they were made outside the breath of God. He wept. Yes, an angel, weeping. Then the church shook. The crucifix above the altar turned upside down. The candle that never went elbowed, and Clara's veil lifted from the altar and hovered midair. The angel dropped to his knees. not in worship. In shame, forgive us. He whispered, you were never meant to kneel to us. In a flash, the angel vanished. Only feathers remained. 12, one for each year she had lived before anyone knew she was holy. And the veil, it drifted down, soaked, and for the first time ripped at the center. Heaven didn't forget Clara. It denied her, not because she sinned, but because she was made to clean enough to remind even angels of what they lost. Episode 5, The Virgin's Diary. Each page was a prayer, until the last. That one wasn't written for God. The diary was found hidden beneath Clara's mattress, wrapped in linen, bound in pale leather. No title, no lock, just a red ribbon bookmark in the final page. Father Marion refused to open it. His hands trembled just holding it, as if the weight of untouched innocence was heavier than sin itself. So the task fell to Sister Eleanor. She had once taught Clara her letters. She remembered the girl's delicate cursive, her soft silence, the way she never ran, never whispered, never sinned. Eleanor sat at the altar and opened the diary alone. The first pages were filled with light, simple prayers, dreams of being a bride of Christ, reflections on staying pure in a world that touched everything with dust. Today I pray for the souls of those who lie without knowing. I prayed He would hold them tighter than they hold their secrets. I saw a boy today. He smiled. I looked away. He is not mine to want. God must love me. He never lets me feel anything too deeply. Each entry shimmered with a kind of painful perfection. But then the prayers began to change. They grew shorter, hollow, scrawled faster, no longer centered on the page. He's quiet now. I speak, and he listens less. I will crying today. I don't know why. My tears feel borrowed. Why do I feel punished for staying clean? Then came the final page. The ribbon had marked it. There were no lines, no dear God, just 4 sentences, written with force. The pen had nearly ripped through the paper. I did everything you asked. I let the world pass through me without taking anything. And now you leave me in silence. If you are not coming, someone else will. As Eleanor finished reading, the chapel lights dimmed. Not a flicker, a pull, like something drawing the color from the room. And from behind the altar, a sound, a page turning, but the diary was closed, still clutched in Eleanor's hands. She looked up and saw it, another book, sitting where the Bible should have been. Not leather, not gold-leafed, just skin, bound with lace, and on its cover, Clara Volume 2. They say Eleanor never left the church after that. She just sat at the altar, flipping through pages no one else could see, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, and sometimes laughing, as if reading a story only hell would publish. Clara's words were once prayers, now they're records, and the next volume is already being written. In someone's dreams, maybe even yours. Episode 6, The Bloodless Miracle. She bled nothing, she bruised nothing, but her body began to shine, and the light made even the saints turn their faces. They kept her body in the chapel now, laid in white, unsealed, untouched. The townspeople no longer dared to bury her. Every time they did, something came back but not her. So they kept her beneath the altar, on a bed of linen and salt, surrounded by candles that melted into shapes no one could explain. And one night, she began to glow. It started in her hands, a pale light, not bright, not warm, just clean, terrifyingly clean, like holiness taken too far, like purity that refused to die. Sister Eleanor was the first to witness it. She had come to leave fresh lilies at Clara's feet, but when she stepped into the chapel, she fell to her knees, her eyes flooded with tears she couldn't stop, not because she was afraid, but because she could suddenly remember every sin she never confessed. Clara's light didn't forgive. It revealed. The church was sealed. Word spread. They called it a miracle. The Vatican sent someone, a man in black, not a priest. Not really. They said he was a verifier, a specialist in miracles and heresies. He entered the chapel at midnight, alone, no prayers, no water, no fear. He simply knelt beside Clara's body and placed his fingers on her chest, then screamed, not from pain, from memory. He began naming people, saints, dates, confessions no one should have known but God. And as he spoke, blood poured from his ears, not his own, the blood of others. Then he fell silent, eyes wide, mouth locked open, and Clara's body, still glowing, still unblemished, still without a drop of blood. The man was found in the morning, alive, but silent. He had torn out his own tongue and etched something into the floor with the shard of a broken saint statue. She is not dead. She is not risen. She is returned. They moved her to the crypt after that, chained the door, placed for Bibles at each corner of the slab, but still, the light leaks through the cracks. And now, people don't come to pray to God. They come to look at her, to be undone, to feel sane. And some don't leave, because Clara's light doesn't give peace. It gives clarity. And once you see yourself through her eyes, you never sleep again. Episode 7. The prayer that opened the wrong door. They begged for heaven to listen. Something else did. The decision was made in secret. The town's remaining faithful was left of them gathered in the sanctuary with trembling hands and reluctant hearts. Not to worship, not to grieve, but to intervene. They believed they could end it. All the strange lights, the voices, the veil that returned night after night, the girl who never left. They would hold a mass, but not just any mass, a mass of deliverance. They called it the sevenfold prayer, ancient, forbidden, buried beneath vacant ink centuries ago. A prayer not meant for the living and never meant for the sinless. At midnight, the chapel filled with flickering candles and desperate eyes. The townspeople whispered Latin that tasted bitter on the tongue. Father Marin, his face now gaunt and hollow from too many sleepless nights, stood before Clara's body. She no longer glowed. She just waited, her hands folded, her lips stitched tight with an invisible thread that no one dared cut. They began the 7th line of the prayer line, said to pierce the heavens. Domini, aperi portum tuam, Lord. Open thy gate. And in that moment, something opened. But it wasn't heaven. Every candle blew out at once. The stained glass windows shattered inward, and a door appeared at the back of the chapel. A new door, black, breathing, wet at the edges like it had been born, not built. It creaked, opened slowly, mockingly. Behind it, not darkness, not light, but a mirror. And in that mirror, Clara stood, eyes wide, veil gone. She reached out, not to them, to herself, to the body lying on the altar. Sister Eleanor screamed. "Calls it," she cried, but no one moved. They were frowning, not in fear, in recognition. Each of them saw something in the mirror, a face behind their own, watching, waiting, grinning with Clara's mouth. The door swung wider, and from inside came the wind, but not air breath. Thousands of breathless voices whispering in unison. She was never yours to pray for. She was never yours to bury. You prayed to be seen, and now you are. Then it stopped. Just as quickly, the door slammed shut, the mirror shattered, and Clara's body, gone. Only the veil remained, folded neatly, still warm, still wet, and on it, written in ash, "Next time, pray louder." Heaven didn't open that night, but something else did, something that heard the prayer clearly and answered in silence. Because not every door that opens wants you to walk through. Some want to walk out. Episode 8. The testimony of the demon who knew her. He screamed in tongues, broke his own fingers, and begged to be exorcised. But when he spoke her name, he wept. They brought him in shackled and gagged, eyes rolled white, skin marked in ancient runes no one in Hollowbrook could translate except Clara's old priest, Father Marin, whose hands shook the moment he saw them. The man hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and hadn't spoken in any human tongue for 3 days, until he was carried into the chapel, until he was placed before the altar where Clara used to lie. Then he whispered one word, clear as glass, "Clara." No one moved. Father Marin stepped forward, crucifix trembling. "Do you know her?" he asked. The man's eyes snapped toward him. Not hatred, not hunger. She shouldn't exist. The man hissed. Then he began to laugh. It wasn't the sound of madness. It was the sound of recognition. "I saw her once," he said, "before the fall." Everyone in the chapel went still. "You're a demon," Marin said. The man nodded, or the thing inside him did. "But I wasn't always." He began to speak faster, words tumbling from his mouth like secrets escaping locked tombs. "She was made outside the choirs, not crafted, not born, allowed, and we don't know why." His voice cracked. "I saw her in the grave between heaven and hell, where souls are weighed, where angels cry over what they can't fix. She walked through it. He started sobbing, and it bent around her. Marion backed away. The demon looked up. There are only two things in existence that heaven cannot command. It growled. One is sin. The room dropped 10 degrees. And the other is purity that was never meant to be holy. Clara, he said, was not sent here. She was a consequence, a correction, a being to clean for a dirty world and to reel for a holy one. She didn't fall. The demon wept. She was never lifted. Antenna screamed, not in pain, in fear. She's remembering now, he cried. She's remembering the place before names. He bit through his own tongue, convulsed, and died before they could reach him. When they examined the body, they found one final message carved into his chest, backwards, from the inside out. Tell her I'm sorry. That night, the church bells rang again, once, and Clara's veil returned to the altar, folded, still wet, this time with something new. Ashes, not human, not bone, but the ashes of something that once believed in God and still remembered her. Episode 9. The chapel that bled her name. No one said her name aloud, but the walls did. In blood, it began with a stain, a thin streak of red beneath the statue of Saint Cecilia, patroness of purity. The sisters thought it was rust. That chapel was old. After all, Hollowbrook's winters were cruel, and the roof hadn't been replaced since Clara was alive. But by morning, the stain had spread across the floor, up the columns, and trailing across the altar in a slow, deliberate arc, like handwriting. Sister Eleanor was the first to read it. She fell to her knees, clutched her crucifix like it could still change what she saw. Not because of what was written, but because of how it was written. Each letter formed in blood and splattered, not smeared or drawn, tenderly, painfully, like it had taken a soul to sign it. And it said, Clara, no last name, no plea, just the name no one in Hollowbrook dared say anymore. Father Marion tried to scrub it clean. Soap, water, holy oils. It returned by nightfall, darker, deeper, now pulsing slightly, like the name itself had a heartbeat. The townspeople refused to enter the chapel. Children cried when they passed the windows. One old woman collapsed when she touched the front door. Her final breath whispered, "She's writing back." That night, more writing appeared on the walls. In Latin, Cor mundum crei in me, Deus, create in me a clean heart, O God. And beneath it, scratched in nail marks. Wasn't it clean enough? The next morning, statues wept. Not tears, blood, just a single line beneath each marble eye. And on the floor where Clara's body once lay, the shape of a woman began to form, outlined in red, hands folded, face lifted, and at her feet, lilies bloomed. But when the sisters touched the petals, they got. Sister Eleanor dreamed that night of Clara floating above the pews, eyes glowing, veil gone, and whispering something that sounded like a hymn. But when she woke, the hymn was still in her ear, still repeating, and her pillow, stained with blood, formed in cursive. Do you see me now? The church tried to cover the writing. Paint, panels, icons, but the blood kept returning, carving itself through every layer. Because the chapel was no longer a place of worship. It was becoming something else. A witness, a vessel not of prayer but of proof. Clara wasn't gone. She was being remembered by the very stones that once refused to hold her. Episode 10. The choir that sang her sin. Children should not sing in Latin at midnight, especially not in unison, especially not without being taught. It started at the orphanage. 12 children, no older than 7, none of them trained in music, none of them taught Latin. But at 12 a.m., the nuns found them standing in the courtyard barefoot, faces pale with sleep, singing perfect harmony, perfect pitch, a language they never learned. The melody was soft, beautiful, even, but every note seemed to peel something back. In the air, in the heart, in the world. One nun vomited, another fainted before the third line, but the children didn't stop. And when they reached the final verse, all 12 opened their eyes in unison, their gaze lifted toward the chapel tower, and they whispered, still in song. She was without blemish, but not without burden. By morning, the song had spread, first to the children of Hollowbrook, then to the old, then the mute, Even those who hadn't spoken in years began to hum it. No one could explain how they knew the words, only that once you sang the hymn, you couldn't forget it. Father Marin brought in a linguist. The man didn't last 5 minutes. He listened to a recording, then tore off his headphones. He screamed, "That's not Latin. That's pre-Genesis." He didn't elaborate, just packed his things and fled the town. Later that night, the hymn returned, louder, from within the chapel. No one was inside, but the sound swirled through the nave like breath on glass. And this time, the lyrics changed. They no longer praised God. They confessed. The pews shook, stained glass cracked, and on the floor, in red script, Clara sinless in flesh, but not in origin. Sister Eleanor trembled. "What does it mean?" she whispered. A child's voice behind her answered. She was made outside his voice. Eleanor turned. No one there, just a small paper folded beneath the altar cloth. It was the original sheet music to the hymn, written in Clara's handwriting, signed with a single word, "Remember." Now, every midnight, the children sing the same melody, the same forbidden truth, and when they finish, a new line appears on the chapel wall, always in red, always fresh. The latest one read, "She did not fall. She was left behind." It is no longer a hymn. It is a warning, because the more they sing, the closer Clara comes to remembering who made her, and what must happen when she finally speaks in her own voice. Episode 11. The Virgin Who Remembered Her Other Life. Clara never sinned in this life, but this wasn't her first. Clara stirred, not in body or form, remained still beneath the altar's crypt, but something deeper began to shift. Her dreams bled outward, her breath curled inside stone, and somewhere, behind the veil of silence, she remembered. It came in pieces, a smell of frankincense burning in a temple not made of stone, a voice chanting in a tongue the earth had never known, and fire always fire. But the strangest memory was this: she was not alone. There had been others, and they had worshipped her. Father Marin found her eyes open, not blinking, not weeping, just awake. He fell to his knees, too afraid to speak, but Clara did. She whispered only 2 words, "I remember," and the walls of the chapel cracked. That night, the air changed. Every mirror and hollow broke warped, not shattered, shifted. Reflections bent in unnatural angles. One child saw herself with wings. Another saw fire behind her eyes. Sister Eleanor saw Clara, not 17, not in white, but naked, covered in ash, standing atop a mountain of bones. The next morning, the veil had vanished again. In its place, a stone tablet no one had ever seen before. On it, etched in ancient symbols and wet with fresh dew, Clara, daughter of the breathless name, bearer of the light that God buried. The priest brought in theologians. They found her name in pre-canon scrolls. In ancient apocrypha, Clara had existed before, not as a person, as a mark, a prophecy of a soul born without sin because she was chosen, but because she had already fallen once and refused to fall again. She had been here before, in fire, in flesh, in silence, and heaven didn't forget her. It simply couldn't place her. She didn't belong to hell. She didn't belong to earth. And now heaven was running out of places to hide her. The final line of the scroll was smudged, almost illegible, but under firelight, it revealed itself. When she remembers, she will awaken, and when she awakens, the stars will weep. Father Marin hasn't spoken since, not because he's lost his voice, but because his mouth won't open anymore. Clara remembers, and the world remembers her back. And soon, she will speak. Episode 12. The crucifix that cracked at her name. Wood doesn't bleed, stone doesn't cry, but when her name was spoken from the altar, the crucifix broke in half. They had stopped saying her name aloud. Clara. The syllables felt cursed now, not in the way demons curse, but in the way truth does, when it no longer fits in scripture. But then came the stranger, a young priest from Rome, eyes bright with disbelief, armed with Latin, logic, and arrogance. He didn't view the stories. He called them myths layered over grief. He demanded to see the chapel. Miracles, he said, must be named aloud, or they rot into superstition. He stood at the altar, hands raised, voice clear, and said her name. Clara. The chapel responded. Not with thunder, not with wind, with silence, the kind of silence that arrives after a scream to allow for the years to hold. And, the crucifix above the altar began to tremble. The priest laughed until it cracked. Right down the center would split with a sound like ribs breaking. Christ's figure peeled away from the beam, falling face first onto the stone floor. Blood bloomed from the statue's forehead. Real, human blood. The young priest collapsed, but not from injury. From what he saw, he screamed into the floorboards. She's standing in the fire again. She's not afraid of him. She is walking toward the throne and it's empty. They carried him out foaming at the mouth. He never regained speech, only scribbles, and one phrase repeated again and again. Not denied, not forgotten, just returned. After that, no one dared enter the chapel. The crucifix remained shattered, and at the spot where Christ had fallen, a footprint began to form, delicate, bare, not burned into the stone, pressed into it, like someone had been standing there all along. Sister Eleanor found a new veil the next morning, folded neatly on the front pew. It wasn't white, it was red, still warm, and stitched into the hem. It turned away before I could kneel. Heaven didn't strike her down. It looked away, and when she finally said his name, nothing answered. But when her name was spoken, everything broke. Episode 13. The gate that refused to open. They summoned heaven one final time, but the gate did not open. It turned its back. They built the altar in the field this time, far from the chapel, far from the veil, far from the broken crucifix that bled Clara's silence into the floor. The town had only one hope left, to send her soul away, up, somewhere, anywhere, just away from them. They brought out the sacred tools, holy water, censer smoke, 3 priests only from Rome, 1 from France, 1 from somewhere no one could quite name, and the old texts, not the Bible, older, bound in cracked leather, sealed in wax, and only to be read in the hour between night and morning. The ritual began at 3:03 a.m. 7 circles were drawn in ash around the altar. The veil, the original, white, still stained with rose water and blood, was placed at the center. Father Marin stood at the edge. Shaking, he would not enter the circles. He only watched. The chanting rose like smoke. The wind grew still. The moon went black, as if swallowed behind glass. And, the sky split, but not with light. With teeth, a gate appeared, not in the air. In reality, it hovered, made of nothing, framed in glowing silence. It pulsed with something holy, but not warm, more like judgment wrapped in distance. They tried to lift the veil toward it, but it didn't move. It hung in the air, closed, refusing. The priests grew louder, sweat and scripture falling from their mouths. A whisper slipped out of the veil, just one word, why, and that was the end. The gate shuddered, turned, and closed, not with a slam, with indifference, like a god turning over in sleep, uninterested in the soul calling out to him. The veil dropped. It hit the ground wet, and from it, lilies bloomed, but black, brittle, and already wilting. One of the priests tore his collar from his neck and began to laugh. He walked into the woods. No one followed. They say he sang Clara's name until his voice gave out, and that the trees grew around him like stone. Sister Eleanor found the altar burned the next morning, not to ash, to glass. At its center, the veil had folded itself into a spiral, and inside it was a new line of thread, stitched in reverse. Heaven has no door for me. Clara wasn't denied entry. She was never given a way in, because heaven isn't locked. It's blind. And, no, she sees better than it ever did. Episode 14. When she finally spoke, she never raised her voice in life. But when she finally spoke after death, the world bent to listen. No one had heard Clara's voice since the night she died. Not a whisper, not a sigh, not a prayer. Only veils, only visions, only blood. But all that changed the night the bells rang backward. It was just past midnight, the air thick with stillness. The chapel doors had long since been sealed, but the bells began to toll slow and deep, not from the tower, from the ground, and each ring echoed in reverse, like time itself was choking on something it had buried too long. Sister Eleanor was the first to hear it. A hum, barely a breath, coming from the crypt, where Clara's body had been lost. She followed the sound, barefoot, through the dark corridor that led beneath the chapel. There was no light, no flame, and yet the stone seemed to shimmer with memory. As she descended, she felt her heart beat slow, not with fear, with recognition. The voice was waiting at the bottom. Not a cry, not a scream, a psalm, soft, ancient, not in Latin, not in tongues. In truth, Elena fell to her knees, tears spilling as Clara's voice filled the hollow stone. It wasn't a song for God, it was for her, herself. I did not ask to be born without sin. I did not ask to be clean where others are broken. I only wanted to be held, not worshipped. 10. The stone cracked, not in violence, in surrender, and a glow neither warm nor cold spread outward from the floor. It rose like water, like breath, like spirit returning to flesh, and Clara stepped out of the silence, eyes open, mouth trembling, and she spoke, not in poetry, not in fire, just 3 words. He never came. The walls wept, every crucifix shattered in unison, and from the rafters, the choir began to sing, but this time, not in harmony, in grief, in fear, in awe. Clara looked upward. There was no sky, just a ceiling painted to look like one. She raised a single hand, and the paint peeled. Behind it, not light, not heaven, just a mirror, and in it, she saw you. She is not vengeful. She is not holy. She is not lost. She is what's left when faith refuses to answer, and the silence learns how to speak for itself. Episode 15, The Day the Saints Hid Their Faces finale. The stained glass shattered not from outside but from shame. Even the saints turned away when she rose. It happened in daylight. For the first time, Clara moved while the sun was still watching. The birds didn't sing that morning. The wind didn't blow. Time felt hesitant, like even the hours didn't know if they were allowed to pass. She walked through the chapel barefoot, clothed in the same white she died in. But it wasn't white anymore, not with purity, with light that dared not name itself. Sister Elena opened the doors for her, not because she was told, but because Clara had already been let in, long before she ever knocked. The people of Hollowbrook gathered silently. They stood in their doorways. They lined the edges of the square. No one spoke, no one ran, because they all remembered her, not as a ghost, not as a miracle, but as the girl they never really knew and never really deserved. Clara entered the chapel for the last time, and the statues turned away, literally, their heads tilted, their eyes dropped. The saints that once stood tall in marble and glass refused to look at her, not from anger, from guilt. She walked to the altar, not glowing, not trembling, just walking, and placed her hand on the slab where her body once lay, where her prayers once floated unanswered, and the stone melted beneath her palm, not into water, not into ash, into pages, thin, fragile pages, a book unformed, waiting to be written. She opened her mouth and finally spoke to the heavens. I forgive you, and for a breathe just home. The world tilted, a wind rushed through the chapel, not cold, not holy, new, the kind of wind that blows after silence breaks, and truth steps into the room uncloaked. Then the glass shattered, every saint in the stained windows cracked from the ice, and where their faces once looked upward, only broken light remained. She left after that. No one stopped her, not even time. The sky dimmed as she passed, and a single lily grew behind each step she took, black, fragrant, unwilting. They say she walked still, not as a ghost, not as a prophet, but as a question heaven still cannot answer. And now, when the faithful kneel in silence, they sometimes feel it, a hand on their shoulder, a breath on their neck, and a voice, soft, unafraid, and impossible to forget. I stay clean, I stay faithful, I stay true. But when I knocked, he wasn't home.